Hello, this is Kristopher Dahir. Welcome to Finding Your South, and it is great to be with you. The last few episodes we've had guests, and I will have quite a few in the future. That was truly so much fun, so I appreciate my friends coming on. And who knows, maybe I will have you on the show at some point and would love to enjoy the conversation. You know, it's interesting. We've been walking through conversations about conflict communication, and we're going to have just a couple more, and then we'll be done with this conversation and step into purpose and some of the other leadership things. I do have a quote I'd like you to think about, and this is something from Max Lucado. And just think about this for a moment in your life as you're driving to work, or if you're in the middle of something, or maybe even this conversation piqued your interest because you're in the middle of something that's difficult. Conflict is inevitable, but combat is optional. And I just want you to think about that for a moment. And as we talk about all this, because you're going to have choices to make, whether you are going to dive in and have combat or just realize that we're going to have conflict with one another without having weapons of mass destruction happening. So a few things to think about as we step in, just to remind you. Definition of conflict are two congruent lines, two parallel lines that become incongruent. So just think about that. Two parallel lines that are rolling down, you guys seem fine, and all of a sudden something happens and you bump into each other. That's conflict. I know that simplifies it because some people are having conflict that is in the middle of a war, and you're like, do these principles really work? Well, I challenge you in this, is you're probably going to have a very difficult time handling large conflict if you don't take the time and figure out how to handle small conflict. And so, yes, sometimes as things get bigger and bigger, there are more tactics to look at. I'm not trying to simplify things, but teaching you or sitting back and looking at some of these principles, I think will help you no matter if it's small, medium, or large. It doesn't mean everything is just perfect, but it does mean these things will help guide you through. So again, the definition of conflict is that there's two congruent lines that become incongruent because they turn and hit each other or touch each other. You might have had that today while you're at work, maybe in your marriage, maybe when you're driving, you name it. Something happened that caused you to have to stop and decide how to respond to somebody or react to somebody. So the other piece of this is resolution. When people use the word conflict resolution, a lot of times it gets really confusing because they don't even like this conversation because, first of all, maybe you don't like the other person very much and you don't like their ideas. And so the idea that you're going to resolve this means somehow you're going to give in or they're going to give in, and maybe you stop and say they're never going to give in. And so you say, I'm not going to give in, so you kind of just put up these two walls. Well, all that resolution means is that there's a path forward. It doesn't mean that you've given away the farm, that you compromise all your beliefs. It just means we find a path forward. At least that's the definitions I'm looking at. So when I talk about conflict resolution in any podcast that I'm doing, any conversation, it has to do with us finding a path forward. And I believe any two people can do that. And so it might take some time. It might take some value pieces, some learning how to communicate, some listening skills. But I do believe there's a way forward. And then another thing before I just hit some points is there's a difference between clean and dirty conflict. And what I mean by that is there's conflict. It's not that necessarily that people talk dirty or even cuss and say things like that. It's that you add something new to the table. A clean conflict means that I'm walking down the road and my friend's walking down the road, and all of a sudden we run into each other and we add nothing to it. It's just the subject at hand. Dirty conflict comes when you take things from the past, or you add a weapon, or you add other fears or other hurts from other people, you name it. When we add those things to the equation, it becomes dirty in essence, and the conflict is more difficult to deal with. And so it doesn't mean it can't be walked through, but if I'm dealing with not just this conflict, but the last 10 years of my marriage of conflicts, obviously this conflict is bigger and more explosive than just what's happening right now. So with that said, these principles, I do believe, go into your workplace. They go into these places. But I want to first talk about how do you prepare yourself for conflict? Now, I'm not even talking about what anybody else does. Let's act like no conflict happens to you in a week. Woo, wouldn't that be great? How do you prepare yourself for this conflict? And the first thing you got to do is look at yourself. And I know you might say, no, I look around and I look for who's going to throw something at me or who has weapons. Don't worry about them, worry about you. And so let's say I have my glasses, and if you're watching this, if you're listening to this on podcast, I have glasses in my hand. And I can't tell you how many times I've had dirty glasses I put on, and I'm watching something and I'm all, why is the TV so foggy? And the truth is, my glasses are dirty. I needed to clean them so I could see clearly what's in front of me. Because maybe, just maybe, what I think is conflict isn't. Or maybe it is conflict, but I think it's bigger, badder, uglier, or whatever than it is. Or maybe there's just true conflict, but I have to be able to see what I'm looking at. And we can't have added things to this. So clean your glasses. And again, obviously think about what that means in your life. Stop and inspect your heart. Inspect what you're doing. Make sure the perspective you have is not clouded by other stuff. So if that's going on, then I'd be careful to walk into high levels of conflict knowing you're not ready. The other thing is know your perspective. If you don't realize that other people don't see what you see, then I'm going to just say you're going to have a very difficult time with conflict, because you're going to always think everybody should see what you see. And I'm going to tell you, nobody in this whole world can see what you see. Even if you stood where I stand, you would not see what I see for multiple reasons. And so you got to admit that there's other perspectives. Matter of fact, I know you know this because you use this all the time. How many times do you know that there's nothing around the corner that you can see, and so you ask somebody who's around the corner? Well, what that is somebody else has a perspective you don't have. Now imagine you ask somebody what's around the corner because you can't see it, and they tell you what it is, and then you argue with them. Obviously that's weird, right? Well, that's us seeing different perspectives, and I might need to believe them a little bit more. But if we're staring at the same thing, and that's where we use our diamonds. We have our diamond, and if you're listening again on podcasts, I have this very large diamond. I also have little diamonds. And we call these diamond moments. And I'll just tell you, this is important to understand, because in a diamond, it's beautiful, but I guarantee, depending where you stand looking at this diamond, you're going to see different things because it's cut in that way. I think life's that way. As we look at different ways and look at different things, we're going to see that. And then the third thing, before you ever step into conflict, value yourself and value others. Decide what kind of boundaries you're going to have for yourself and others. And how do you really look at people? See, I do believe strongly that if you don't value yourself, then you're going to turn around and not value other people. You will treat people, in a sense, almost how you treat yourself. And so if you think that you're dirty, you're bad, you're shameful, then you're going to sometimes exude that to other people. But for me, I strongly look at other people and I value them. I look at them and I say, you know what? I may not understand where they're coming from. I don't look like them. I don't sound like them. But I value them. And for me, it's because I believe in Christ and I believe that He died for them. I believe everything He did was for them. Now, with that said, if you don't believe that, I'm sure there's other reasons you can find value in people. But for me, it's pretty easy. They're valuable because He said so, because the Bible says so. And so in my life, Christ has given me value. Even though I'm broken, even though I've messed up, even though I didn't say it right, even though I'm not tall enough to jump and dunk a ball, even if I'm not short enough to, whatever, you name it, I'm not enough. And I still believe God has shown value. And so these three things you have to do before we ever can get into that conversation. So I'm going to go through them again, because I just want to make sure you catch them clearly. And then I have a few points that I want to go through as you enter into conflict, that this podcast and the next one will make it real easy for you to step in and say, if I listen to these two things, I can be ready for what's to come. But again, let's come back, clean your own glasses. That could come in a lot of forms. If you are a man or a woman of faith, spend time with the Lord. Spend time praying. Have some worship. Ask the Lord to touch your heart. If that's not a piece of your life, maybe go read a book. Maybe go meditate. Go take some time. Go out into the mountains. Get some perspective. Maybe travel a little bit. There's a lot of things you can do to clean those glasses, but part of it's being honest with yourself and making sure that you don't walk away from who you really are and what's going on. Now, I can't tell you how many times walking in with dirty glasses will make you look foolish. It just will. If you come in thinking you saw something, and I've led a lot of things, and there are times I've just been dead wrong because the glasses I was wearing, what I was looking at, the perspective I had was just wrong. Now, the other piece is know your perspective. Now, remember this. Other people have different perspectives. But here's what happens in that know your perspective. If I'm sitting here and I'm looking at this and somebody tells me that what they see, but I really don't know what I see, I'm not taking the time to understand who I am, then two things tend to happen. Either I just agree with them, but that doesn't help anybody. They need my perspective. I need to know what's going on because we value each other. So value yourself so you know your perspective. Or if I really don't know my perspective, I become uncomfortable. And all of a sudden, I start acting weird. And that makes other people feel weird. And next thing you know, you create conflict just because you don't know what you're talking about. I see this happen more times than anything. I've been a politician for a lot of years, and I watch people who are supposed to know what they're talking about because people think, if you're in office, you know everything. You don't. And you're supposed to know it, and so people come say things, and all of a sudden you find yourself just saying things that aren't true. And this is a difficult motion for a lot of people, so I challenge you to slow down, make sure you know what you're talking about. And again, the other thing very important is to find how to value others, value yourself, value how people are and who they are.